Hello everyone, a very good evening to one and all present here. So today is the second lecture on the topic environmental issues. So in the last lecture, we discussed about what are the various environmental issues, major environmental issues, and we get to know that pollution is one of those environmental issues which we need to discuss and for which we need to take steps. So in the last lecture, we discussed that pollution is any kind of undesirable changes that changes the biological, physical or chemical properties of the soil, water or air, which are very essential for human beings. And the changes in these properties make them less usable or makes them less, make them harmful for the use of human beings and for the other organisms like for animals and the plants that are present in the environment. So in the last lecture, we discussed about the air pollution. And in today's lecture, we discussed, in the last lecture, we discussed about air pollution, what are the various reasons behind the air pollution, and what are the, we also we also discussed a case study where how the government of India has enforced a law and how the government of India came into the action when Delhi became like one of the was given the fourth position in the world's in highly polluted cities of the world. So basically how these different laws were implemented and what were the laws that were implemented, we studied about that. So in today's lecture, we will learn about another kind of pollution, which is the water pollution. So let's start with that. Firstly, we know that water is a precious resource that sustains all the life on earth. We know that the 70% of the earth is covered with the water, and it is really very important as it is vital for the drinking, sanitation, agriculture, industry, and the health of our ecosystem. However, with time, we see that the quality of water is increasingly threatened by the pollution. So we know that the rivers are getting polluted. The fresh water which is available is now getting polluted due to the seepage of harmful chemicals in the soil. The underground water is also getting polluted. So the quality of water is increasingly threatened by the population and is increasingly deteriorating from time to time. So water pollution is what? So water pollution refers to the contamination of water bodies such as rivers, lakes, oceans, and groundwater by various pollutants that negatively impact its quality and usability. So the various pollutants, like for example, the domestic sewage, the industrial effluents, the dyes, which are constantly being released into the rivers, etc., or the harmful chemicals, the waste from the pharmaceutical industries, these waste which are constantly being released into the water bodies are making these water bodies or the water polluted and therefore less use and depleting its quality and its usability. So water pollution has become is not only a local or a national issue, but it is a global issue with far-reaching consequences. So it does not have its impact only on the nation, but it has its global impact. And it not only affects the health and well-being of humans, but also disrupts the ecosystems, harms aquatic life, and undermines the sustainability of our natural resources. So how do we differentiate between a fresh water which is suitable, which is for the use, and how do we differentiate how do we differentiate that water from a polluted water? So there are certain properties of a polluted water. So whenever certain chemicals or certain harmful pollutants are being added to the water, they lead to the changes in the fresh water, in the properties of a fresh water. So the first and foremost property is the discoloration. So we know that fresh water do not, like the pure water do not have any color. So the polluted water may have an odd color, like depending on the type of waste material which is being added into the water, it may be green, brown or gray, or it may seem hazy or murky, like it is not transparent like a fresh water. Algal blooms, suspended particles or chemical contaminants can all contribute to the discoloration of these, like the discoloration of the water leading to the pollution of water. The second is the unpleasant smell. So we know that fresh water or the drinking water do not have any smell. So unpleasant, or while the polluted water actually has some unpleasant smell. So unpleasant or nasty odors may be present in the polluted water. The presence of chemicals, sewage, decomposing organic materials, or algae may be one of the reasons due to the smell which we are getting from the water. So the third is the foaments. Come, we know that these are like, this is very common. Even in the news, we get to know that the Yamuna is like, we see a large amount of foam in the Yamuna river, the water of Yamuna river. Scum is formed. So the water pollution can cause foam or scum to develop on water bodies. So unlike the fresh water bodies which are not polluted, the polluted water bodies can cause the foam or the scum to develop. This could happen as a result of the detergents, like due to the addition of detergents, the foam may form due to the addition of contaminants or an abundance of the organic waste. The foam may be formed. The fourth one is the floating debris. So the floating debris includes the floating particles like the plastic bottles, bags, oil slicks, and dead vegetations are example of the floating trash. We ourselves have seen many bottles floating on the rivers or on the, like, even when we go for some destination, like we go to some destination at beach, we found that people just left their waste products at the side of the beach. So these waste products get contaminate, like these waste products contaminate the water bodies that are present in the vicinity, and these substances then lead to, and these substances then form the part of the floating debris on the water bodies. The next common cause can be the algal blooms. So algal blooms are like due to the excessive runoff of nitrogen compounds like nitrogen, phosphorus, which we also use for the as chemical fertilizers, which are NPK, which like nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, which are very common components of the fertilizers we use. So due to the leaching of these chemicals, or due to the water runoff or the agriculture runoff or the water discharge from of uh, these chemicals become sufficiently high in the water that the algae grows beyond its capacity. So this is known as the algal bloom, where the algae can grow beyond its capacity, and as a result, massive algal blooms grow, reducing the amount of, so we have algal blooms, reducing the amount of oxygen in the water. So the algae consumes the oxygen which is present in the water, and thus it reduces the amount of oxygen that is present in the water and harms the aquatic ecosystem. The next is the reduced transparency. So because of the suspended particles, like we know that water is transparent, it does not have any color as I mentioned. So because of the suspended particles, sediments or algae, polluted water frequently has less clarity or transparency as compared to the fresh water. Now this may have an impact on how much light gets in, how quickly aquatic plants develop, and how long creatures can live. Because when the water is not transparent, obviously it is difficult for the light to reach to the bottom of the surface. And therefore, it might affect the growth of the aquatic plants or the creatures which are present in the bottom of the, like in the water bodies, which are present in the bottom of the water bodies. The next point is the unbalanced pH. So the pollution may change the water's pH, making it more acidic or alkali, depending on the type of the pollutants which are being added. So acid rain and industrial discharges are frequent source of imbalanced pH, like pH imbalances, and this can damage the aquatic life and can alter the dynamics of the ecosystem. The next is the high turbidity. So the cloudiness or haziness of water throughout on by suspended particles is referred to as turbidity. And as a result of sedimentation, soil erosion, or industrial discharges, polluted water frequently has a high turbidity level as compared to a fresh water. So fresh water is usually not turbid. So turbidity we can easily see, we can visualize with our naked eyes. So just to give you an example of how what you can actually call as turbid. So if you add just 1 or 2 drops of milk to the water, you'll see that it becomes milky. So it is slightly turbid, you can say. So it may obstruct the sun, which would affect the photosynthesis and aquatic environments. So more or less, these points are interrelated, and these basically these like high turbidity or the reduced transparency. High turbidity is actually Reduced transparency is actually the resultant of high turbidity, and all of these reduces the amount of light that reaches to the bottom of the water surface, thus reducing the growth of the thus affecting the growth of the creatures which are present at the bottom of the water bodies. The next is the elevated temperature. So the thermal pollution can cause the changes in the temperature, and the emissions from the thermal power plants can elevate the temperature of the water body. A rise in water temperature affects fish and other creatures by reducing the oxygen levels and upsetting the aquatic ecosystems. The next, because we know that the ability of any oxygen or any gas to get dissolved in the water depends on the temperature as well. So with the increase in the temperature, the oxygen which is get dissolved is not a, available as such to the aquatic ecosystem, and therefore a rise in the temperature may affects the fish and other creatures by reducing the oxygen levels and upsetting the aquatic ecosystem. The next is the elevated chemical levels. So contaminants such as heavy metals such as lead or mercury, pesticides, fertilizers, medicines, or industrial chemicals may be present in the polluted water at high concentrations. So the presence of these elements like mercury or the lead in the water at such high concentrations can endanger the human health and can be hazardous to the aquatic life. So there is like these chemicals or these heavy chemicals, the presence of these heavy chemicals are known to cause diseases in the humans as well as can affect the aquatic flora and fauna. So therefore, realizing the importance of maintaining the cleanliness of the water bodies, the Government of India has passed the Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1974 to safeguard our water resources. So basically, this law was was passed by the Government of India in 1974. The law is Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act, and this was formulated to safeguard the water resources from the pollution. So one of the major source of water pollution is the domestic sewage. So domestic sewage is one of the main cause of water pollution in the globe, and the sewage water that is being released from these households is known as the wastewater. So wastewater or the domestic sewage can be described as the untreated discharge of waste products from residential areas into the water bodies, including human excreta, home chemicals, soaps, and detergents. So the water quality, human health, and the ecosystem are all significantly at risk from improper home sewage management. Now, what are the causes of domestic sewage pollution? So first is the rapid urbanization and population expansion. We know that if I talk about today's scenario, we know that India is the highest populated country, and not only this, rapid urbanization has been taking place in India, and this has led to a rise in the production of the wastewater, the water which is being released from these households, which overwhelms the already existing sewage infrastructure and the treatment facilities. The next is actually the poor sewage infrastructure. So the poor or obsolete sewage infrastructure such as sewers, treatment facilities, and collecting systems may cause sewage to be directly discharged into the water bodies, thus resulting into the pollution of the water bodies after being only partially or not at all treated. The next is the septic systems that are not working properly. So the septic systems in rural and suburban areas that are improperly built, constructed, or maintained may leak sewage, causing toxins to seep into the soil. And once the toxins get seep into the soil, they may come into the contact with the groundwater, thus contaminating the groundwater or the local water sources. So if I talk about like total impurities that are present in the water. It might be 0.1% in domestic sewage. So a mere 0.1% impurities make domestic sewage unfit for human use. And these 0.1 impurities may comprise of suspended solids, for example, sand, slate, and clay, the colloidal metals like fecal matter, bacteria, cloth, and paper fibers, dissolved materials like nutrients, like for example, nitrate, ammonia, phosphate, sodium, and calcium. We know that, like we have also studied in, like you might have studied in the other lectures also, that if I talk about the waste treatment, water treatment plant, then it is easy to remove the waste which is solid, which is large in size, but it is difficult to remove the materials which are dissolved in the water. So therefore, solids are relatively easy to remove from the wastewater, but dissolved salts such as nitrates, phosphate, and other nutrients and toxic metal ions and organic compounds are actually very difficult to be removed from these water, from the polluted water, and therefore their utilization, their release into the water body should be limited, so that we do not have to treat them with harsh chemicals to remove these dissolved materials. So the parameter by which the criteria for determining the degree of organic contamination in water is actually known as the biological oxygen demand. So biological oxygen demand is a very important criteria for determining the degree of how much organic compounds, or how the water is how much contaminated with the organic compounds. So it basically, as the name suggests, it calculates how many dissolved oxygen bacteria use to break down organic molecules in the water. So BOD, so this actually suggests that more the oxygen, dissolved oxygen, the bacteria use to break down, that means the more amount of organic matter is present in that water body. That means higher the BOD, higher is the degree of pollution. So BOD is a crucial measure of the quality of the water and the level of pollution brought by organic pollutants. It is measured by comparing the dissolved oxygen levels in a water sample before and after a specified incubation period. So the difference between the difference between the initial and the final dissolved oxygen concentration indicates the amount of oxygen that is to be consumed by the microorganisms. So we know that, so this graph actually itself shows that, so firstly we know that the microorganisms are involved in the biodegradation of organic matter, and the receiving water body consumes a lot of oxygen, and as a result what happens is, whenever we have a sewage discharge, we can see that there is a decrease in the concentration of the dissolved oxygen initially, due to the consumption of that dissolved oxygen by the bacteria in uh, decomposing that matter. So due to the decrease in the concentration of the dissolved oxygen, we know that the fish kill and the disappearance of the clean water organisms takes place. But with time, when the waste products get degraded, the biological oxygen demand decreases and the dissolved oxygen increases. So once the so higher the BOD, lower is a dissolved oxygen. Lower the BOD, higher is the dissolved oxygen. So lower the BOD, more the dissolved oxygen concentration. So therefore, there will be the more the fish will be able to survive, or the aquatic ecosystem will flourish. The next, as I mentioned, was the algal bloom. So the presence of the large amount of nutrients like nitrogen, phosphates in the water can also cause the excessive growth of planktonics. Planktons are the free-floating algae, which are called an algal bloom. These algal bloom imparts a distinct color to the water bodies. So algal blooms can deteriorate the quality of the water, and once the quality of the water is being deteriorated, it leads to the mortality of the fish, or it may lead to the decrease in the quality of the aquatic ecosystem. So some bloom forming algae are extremely toxic to human beings and the animals that is to the flora and fauna which is present in the water. So these algal blooms these algae that may bloom can be toxic, extremely toxic, due to the release of the toxins into the water bodies. So one example for such is the introduction of the alien species. So it's a beautiful mauve colored flower, which is very appealing, and it's appealingly shaped floating plants in the water bodies. These plants are not native to India, but were introduced into the India for their lovely flowers, and they have once they were introduced, they have actually caused the havoc by their excessive growth by causing the blocks in our waterways. So it is really difficult to remove these from the water bodies, and therefore these plants consumes a lot of nutrients for the growth, and thereby affecting not only the aquatic ecosystem but also these plants when flow from one side to another side, these may lead to the obstructions in the sewage, thus causing the blocks in the waterways. Also, they grow faster than the ability to remove them. And these are the plants which are known as water hyacinth. So water hyacinth are also known as Icornia crassipus. These water hyacinth plants were introduced in India. These are not native to India. And these are known as the terror of Bengal because they create havoc in the Bengal. They grow abundantly in the eutrophic water bodies and lead to the imbalance in the ecosystem dynamics of the water bodies. Sewage from our homes as well as from the hospitals are likely to contain many undesirable pathogenic organisms, and its disposable into a water without proper treatment may cause outbreak of serious diseases such as dysentery, typhoid, jaundice, cholera, etc. Unlike domestic sewage, wastewater, as I mentioned, from the influence from the industries like petroleum, paper manufacturing, metal extraction and processing, chemical manufacturing, industries related to the dye often contain toxic substances. Notably, they contain the heavy metals defined as the metals with density. So heavy metals are the metals that have the density greater than 5 gram per centimeter cube. So as I mentioned that the copper, lead, these are some of the heavy metals, and a variety of organic compounds add may act as pollutants to the water bodies. One of the major problems due to the accumulation of these harmful substances which are difficult to be degraded is the biomagnification. So biomagnification involves the increasing concentration of these heavy metals uh, in the organisms with the increasing trophic levels. So the few toxic substances can undergo biological magnification, which is also known as biomagnification in the aquatic food chain. One such is identified for the DDT. So so DDT is it's a compound which is used in is a insecticide which is used. So biomagnification refers to the increase in the concentration of the toxicant at the successive trophic levels. So this happens because a toxic substance accumulated by an organism cannot be metabolized or excreted and is thus passed on to the next higher trophic level. So this phenomena is well known for DDT, and in this manner the concentration of DDT is increased at the successive trophic levels. So we can see that the water which contains a DDT maybe due to the release of the agriculture products into the water, or due to the contamination of water bodies with the agriculture fields, the water bodies might have a DDT of 0.003 parts per billion. But the zooplanktons then will have 0.04 parts per million. In the small fish, it was found to be 0.5 parts per million. In the large fish, it further increases or accumulated to 2 parts per million. And in the fish-eating birds, it is found to be gets accumulated, and it was found that the concentration of DDT was 25 parts per million. So higher concentration of DDT has been shown to have the effect on the calcium metabolism in the birds, and it has been found that it may lead to the thinning of the eggshells of the birds and their premature breaking, therefore thereby affecting the growth or decline in the bird population. The next is the eutrophication. So basically, I forgot to mention the full form of DDT. So DDT is an insecticide, as I mentioned, and it it stands for dichloro-diphenyl trichloroethane, and it is widely used in agriculture, and its biomagnification has been observed and has been well studied in the aquatic ecosystem. So the next is the eutrophication. Eutrophication is the natural aging of the lake. So by the nutrient enrichment of its water. So due to the introduction of the large amount of nutrients in the water bodies, eutrophication may happen. So in a young lake, the water is cold and clear, supporting little life. With time, streams draining into the lakes introduce nutrients such as I mentioned, nitrogen and phosphorus. And these nutrients encourage the growth of the aquatic organisms. So once the fertility, or as the fertility of the fertility increases, the plant and the animal life burgeons and organic remains begin to be deposited on the lake bottom. So basically the plant and animal life at the bottom suffers. They are not able to get the enough dissolved oxygen or enough nutrients, and therefore they may die, and the organic remains may begin to be deposited on the lake bottom. And over the centuries, as silt and organic debris pile up, the lake grows shallower and warmer, with warm water organisms supplanting those that thrive in a cold environment. So these warm water organisms then replace the ones which were present in the cold environment. The marsh plants take root in the shallows and begin to fill in the original lake basin. Eventually, the lake gives way to large masses of floating plants, finally converting into the land. So this is how the water body which was once a river is now converted to the land. So depending on the climate, size of the lake and other factors, the natural aging of the lake may span thousands of years. However, due to the rapid urbanization and the increase in the agriculture practices, the pollutants from the man activities like effluents from the industries and homes can periodically accelerate the aging process. And this phenomenon is called the cultural or accelerated eutrophication. The next is the thermal wastewater. So heated thermal wastewater flowing out of electricity generating units, example thermal power plants, contribute another important category of pollutants. Now the thermal wastewater eliminates or reduces the number of organisms which are sensitive to high temperature, as I mentioned earlier also, and they may enhance the growth of plants and fish in the extremely cold areas, but only after causing damage to the indigenous flora and fauna. So we get to know that there are various factors which are responsible for the water pollution. And there are many results of that water pollution, like lake aging of the lake, eutrophication. So what are the preventive steps that we need to prevent the water being getting polluted? So the first one is the implement and enforce of severe industry, agriculture and wastewater treatment facility restrictions, permit and inspect polluters, promote environmental law enforcement and sanctions. The next is the cleaner production methods to reduce the waste and the pollution. So the pre-treat and recycle industrial wastewater. For this, we can avoid this. To avoid spillage, store and handle hazardous materials properly. The next is sustainable agriculture. So encourage organic and integrated pest management to decrease chemical use. Nutrient management can reduce the fertilizer runoff and soil erosion. And to prevent the sedimentation and runoff, create buffer zones and vegetation strips around the waterways so that most of the nutrients that were used for the agriculture purposes do not run off into the water bodies, thereby preventing the algal blooms, conditions like algal blooms or eutrophication. Improve and maintain the sewage treatment plants to remove the contaminants. Address emerging pollutants with advanced treatment technologies. Promote biofilters and artificial wetlands for wastewater treatment. So most of the waste can be entrapped in these wetlands so that the water which reaches to the ultimate final water body is filtered by other natural methods. The next is the stormwater management. So retention ponds, green infrastructure and the permeable surfaces minimize the runoff and pollutants. Avoid untreated stormwater discharge. The next is the source prevention pollution. So reduce, reuse and recycle. We know that these are the 3 R's which are very eco-friendly. So recycle to reduce the waste. Dispose of the paints and oils and chemicals at collection centers, not in the water bodies. Promote eco-friendly products and the practices. The next is the public awareness and education. So promote water conservation and pollution avoidance, promote appropriate garbage disposal and understanding of its effects, volunteer and clean up the local waterways. So volunteering, and like we may see that there are some people who actually volunteer for cleaning up the local waterways. So it is very essential. Maybe weekly we can have that activity where the locals of the locals of a area, particular area, will engage in the cleaning of the waterways at that local surface. The last one is the international cooperation. So share information and collaborate to the combat transboundary water contamination, support international water resource protection agreements. So these are some of the strategies that may be followed to conserve the water, to prevent the water from being contaminated. And with this, I would like to end today's lecture. So today's lecture was a very basic lecture, mainly focusing on the water pollution, which is as a major issue. What are the different sources of water pollution, and how what can be the impact of this water pollution, and what preventive measures can be taken to prevent the water from being polluted. With this, I would like to end today's lecture, and thank you all for attending it.